They sent you flowers on the second day, planned a weekend trip after the first week, told you they'd never felt this way before, that you were different, that this was fate, and for a moment, it felt like the relationship you'd been waiting for your entire life. The kind of connection people write songs about, the kind of certainty you thought only happened in stories. Everything arrived at once, and it felt like being chosen. Then, a few months later, you couldn't remember the last time they asked how your day went. Love bombing is not generosity. It's not enthusiasm. It's the deliberate use of excessive attention and affection to create dependency, lower defenses, and accelerate emotional attachment before the target has enough information to make an informed decision. Psychologists recognize it as a manipulation tactic often found in cycles of abuse, and it works because it hijacks the normal bonding processes that make trust and connection possible in the first place. The warmth feels real. That's precisely what makes it effective. The cost of missing this pattern is not just heartbreak. It's isolation from friends who tried to warn you, financial entanglement before you understood who you were dealing with, contracts signed, leases co-signed, major life decisions made at a speed that felt romantic but functioned as a lock. By the time the attention stops, you may be legally, financially, or socially bound in ways that are difficult to undo. And that difficulty is often the point. The mechanism relies on two well-documented psychological principles. The first is intermittent reinforcement. In the early stage, the person floods you with gifts, compliments, constant communication, and declarations of love that feel disproportionate to the actual time you've known each other. This activates the brain's reward system. You begin to associate this person with intense positive emotion, and the speed creates a sense of urgency. You feel special, chosen, seen in a way that's hard to explain to anyone on the outside. The second principle is reciprocity. When someone gives you something, you feel a social and emotional pressure to give back. That pressure can be emotional, financial, or behavioral. So when they ask for your time, your forgiveness, your money, or your compliance with something that makes you uncomfortable, saying no feels ungrateful. After all, look at everything they've already done for you. That guilt is not an accident. It is the architecture of the trap. And once you recognize it as architecture, it becomes something you can study rather than something you simply fall into. Here's what this looks like in practice. You meet someone, and within days, they're texting you good morning and good night without fail. They say they've never connected with anyone this fast. They want to meet your family. They talk about moving in together, about the future, about permanence, all before you've had a single disagreement or seen them under any kind of stress. When you suggest slowing down, they say you're overthinking it, that real love doesn't wait, that you're afraid of something good. So you override the discomfort and tell yourself you're being too cautious. Or consider a workplace version. A new manager takes over your team and praises you constantly in the first 2 weeks. They tell you you're the only one who truly understands the vision. They give you access and information others don't have. Then, gradually, they ask you to work unpaid hours, to cover for their errors, to stay quiet about decisions that don't sit right with you. Because they've positioned themselves as your champion, it feels disloyal to push back. By the time the praise fades and the demands grow, you're already invested in protecting the relationship you thought you had. Or someone enters your social world and immediately treats you like a best friend they've known for years. They're always available. They mirror your interests, your humor, your values. It feels effortless and rare. Then the borrowing starts. The favors grow larger. They begin pressuring you to spend less time with other friends, framing those friendships as threats to what the two of you have. By the time you recognize the pattern, the people who would have named it have already drifted away. What interrupts the pattern is time and outside perspective. Love bombing depends on urgency. It loses its power when you slow down deliberately, verify what's being said, and consult people who are outside the emotional current you're swimming in. The tactic also depends on your not naming it. Once you recognize excessive intensity as a strategy rather than authentic feeling, something shifts. The discomfort you were taught to dismiss becomes information you can actually use. Naming the pattern does not mean you were foolish to have felt the warmth. It means you are now better equipped to assess what comes next. So here's what to watch for. Intensity that moves much faster than the actual history of the relationship. Pressure to commit, to isolate, or to make decisions before you feel ready. Language that frames your caution as a personal flaw or your boundaries as rejection. Gifts and gestures that arrive with invisible strings attached. And the gap, often the most telling signal, between what they say during the high phase and how they behave once the intensity fades. If you recognize this dynamic while it's happening, create deliberate space. Observe how they respond to a reasonable, calm boundary. Do they respect it or do they escalate? Talk to people outside the relationship not because they control your choices, but because they have the emotional distance you currently lack. Keep your financial and legal independence intact. Don't make major shared commitments until you've had enough time to observe their behavior under conflict, under boredom, and under circumstances where they don't get what they want. If you're already deeply entangled, documentation matters. Keep clear records of promises made, money borrowed, and patterns that concern you. Not for retaliation, but because manipulation often involves rewriting history, and having a record protects your own clarity. Reach out to people you may have drifted from. Rebuild the support network that was quietly narrowed. And if the situation involves financial control, threats, or any concern for physical safety, prioritize professional support, legal advice, or a domestic violence resource before any direct confrontation. Now, a necessary distinction. Someone buying you flowers is not love bombing. Genuine enthusiasm in a new relationship is not manipulation. Compliments are not a red flag on their own. The difference lies in proportion, in what happens when you introduce a boundary, and in what remains once the honeymoon energy settles. Healthy affection builds incrementally, tolerates slowness, and holds steady. Love bombing spikes fast, resists limits, and disappears once it has accomplished its purpose. This is also not a diagnosis. Love bombing describes a behavior pattern, not a clinical category. It appears in cults seeking to create group loyalty, where psychologists have noted it as a technique used to build false unity against the outside world. It appears in romance fraud, where it functions as a documented method of building false trust before financial exploitation. It appears in some personal relationships where the person causing harm may not even have a clear conscious awareness of what they're doing, only a learned pattern inherited from their own relational history. But you don't need to understand someone's psychology to trust what you're experiencing. Behavior is enough evidence to act on. Go back to those flowers on the second day, the weekend trip planned after 1 week. The declarations that felt almost too certain for how little time had passed. The certainty that arrived before the two of you had ever sat through a difficult conversation or a long, quiet evening with nothing to prove. You weren't wrong to feel something was off. You were simply taught, by culture, by hope, by the warmth of it all, to treat that feeling as a problem with you rather than a signal worth examining. What if you had trusted that discomfort early on? What would have changed if you'd said, "Let's slow this down," and they had responded with patience instead of pressure? This material exists for recognition and self-protection. It is not a guide to manipulation or a framework for controlling others. Use it to identify pressure when it arrives, to set and hold boundaries with confidence, and to exit situations that feel wrong before they become impossible to leave. The dark mind ledger. Understand the pattern. Protect yourself. This content is for educational and defensive purposes only. Understanding these tactics helps you recognize and protect yourself from manipulation. It is not intended to harm others.